Why don't we start with Georgia Clemson, Dan? Because that was kind of like the big game to lead off the day at high noon. They played it in Atlanta. It was in tandem with the Penn State-West Virginia game, which was in Morgantown, but had a lengthy weather delay because it looked like the apocalypse had shown up and it was raining sideways and windy and black, and it was awful. They eventually resumed that game after a good long time. But Georgia won in resounding fashion 34-3 over the Clemson Tigers. As we mentioned on our preview show,
I'm just preparing the meat.
That tenderizes it.
That tenderizes it in a big way. Yeah.
This was indeed a crock potting by the Georgia Bulldogs. And
one of us was able to predict that. Not me. Not I.
Not you. I actually had a very, very healthy week of picks.
You did. You did well.
Which means that next week it's going to fall out of the bottom. But nonetheless, I thought Georgia looked really good once they got rolling. Trevor Etienne was suspended. We talked about that a little bit on the preview show, that was a possibility. I think it tells you everything you need to know that this roster is stocked to the point where they can put a freshman, Nate Frazier, in, who does not even have a headshot on ESPN.com, Dan.
No headshot, no problem.
You can put him in and he runs for 8 yards a carry, plug and play. No big deal. Against the Clemson defense, mind you, that I think will end up, when all is said and done, being very, very good. But, Georgia just across the board, they hold Clemson to 188 yards. I mentioned this on the Thursday show as well. But if Clemson couldn't run, that was a problem. If you forced Cade Klubnik to throw it a bunch of times, that was potentially a problem. He threw it 29 times. It wasn't a great formula. Under 5 yards per attempt. A 31-point win for the Georgia Dogs, Dan.
Yeah, it was for like a fleeting few minutes. If you were a Clemson person, you're like, wow, the defense is making plays, right? The line, Peter Woods, guys just like in Georgia, offensive players' faces, and the Dogs really couldn't get a ton going early on, but it really just seemed like they were sort of game planning in the middle of the game, getting ready for the second half. Like, okay, this is what Clemson's going to do with this kind of look. This is what they're going to do with that kind of look. If I'm a Clemson person in this moment, like, forget the transfer portal, forget like Daboisms, whatever. But like, we're now talking about years of unimpressive offensive play. Whether it's like Will Shipley is like the bright shining star that is the exception to this comment, but like, how much more of this do we need to see? Like, it's game one, everybody improves after game one, but if you spend your entire offseason talking yourself into Clemson's offense finally looking better, like Ty did. TJ Moore, 1 catch, 7 yards. Was that the final line?
Yeah. Was not an impact player in this game, suffice to say.
Let's be clear. Not necessarily reflective of his college career.
No.
But against Georgia, would have been nice to have somebody pop. Nobody pops for the Clemson offense yet again. And so Clemson is going to be this program that measures itself, fair or not, now still against some of the nation's best. And I think that needs to be readjusted, right? Like, they recruit well, right? It's by all means like an A+ run program. Again, say what you will about the transfer portal stuff and the Daboisms, and now's the time to buy stock, et cetera, et cetera. I root for a team who got mauled by Georgia to open up a season. I've been there. I know the feeling. It will get better because Clemson will not play Georgia the rest of the year.
Correct.
That's probably the best thing to come out of this game if you're a Clemson fan. There's no more Georgia on the schedule.
Got it out of the way. Got it out of the way early.
You got it out of the way. That's the neck crack element of all of this. But when you have an entire summer to prepare to score a touchdown, and you can't, and to move the ball impressively once, twice, 3 times down the field, and you can't, you're recruiting against Georgia. The players are considering Georgia and Clemson at the exact same time. And you go to Georgia to succeed. You go at Clemson to hopefully develop into an NFL player on some level. That's kind of where we are right now, because even if Clemson turns around and wins the ACC, we kind of know that it doesn't mean that much coming off of this.
I mean, Clemson deserves the right to improve and learn and get better from
of course.
this. And they will, right? They absolutely will. But Georgia does this to a lot of teams, right? I'm not trying to be dismissive of Georgia with this monster win to start the season. I just don't know what else to say about Georgia at this point, because they're both more talented and, in this case, better coached than pretty much everybody else that they play. They're just kind of at critical mass. It shouldn't be a shock to the world that they would go out there and destroy another good team, which I think Clemson will eventually be. So Clemson in that sense is not unique, but 188 yards of total offense is a bit discouraging. I don't think Cade Klubnik's a high-level quarterback for as much as I've joked about the club level.
Right.
But that's kind of beside the point, right?
But is this a school that a high-level quarterback potentially can turn into a high-level quarterback in actuality?
So here's why I bring this up.
I say probably not.
What I am genuinely curious about is how the Clemson fan base feels about Dabo.
Right.
I've known the answer to that for a while, but I'm just curious in light of this. Did you hear his comment on game day, speaking of Daboisms?
No, maybe.
So he made a comment, and I think it was probably taken a little bit out of context, and I think I get what he was going for with it. But, quote, it's not about the scoreboard today. It's about how you play.
Yeah.
The meaning, I think, behind that is if you take care of the little things, the big things will take care of themselves, right?
Yes,
That's what he's going for.
It's a process-oriented thing, yeah.
But Dabo, like, he has this weird affinity for putting his foot in his mouth when they put a microphone in front of him. And I'm really curious to know how Clemson fans feel about that in retrospect. Because this is something you say when you're a little too committed to your own bit, you know, like doing things the quote unquote right way or what you think is the right way in this case. We've done this show since 2008. You know, I'm not much of a takesman. That's just not my thing. But I heard this, and the first two words that popped into my head were, oh, that's a loser mentality.
Right.
That is not going to go over well if they don't play well, and they did not play well. So, again, I apologize for this guy somewhat in the Clemson preview, and I was big on what they did in the receiver room, and that I don't think that's necessarily changed. This was a good team that they went up against. They might be the national champions.
Sure.
But this is a proud program at Clemson that rightly expects to be a contender year in and year out, that spends to be a contender year in and year out. And that was neither a quote nor a game that led me feel that great about anything. So I'm just, the Clemson people out there, chime in and let me know your thoughts. But I heard that and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, even if he meant something else by it.
Well, I mean, it comes down, this is applicable to literally every team in the country, right? That you spend all spring, summer, early fall, whatever, hoping for one thing, no matter who you root for. And it's either very specific or broad growth.
Yeah.
And you get the sense from afar, we're not watching a Clemson program that is capable of growing to what they were before. That they can grow into something more competent in certain ways, but the conversation around Clemson on a certain level seems to be inevitable and heading in a very specific direction. And when you expect growth in a micro sense, macro sense, whatever, and this is what we see, you're like, okay, you're going to do it against Wake Forest, you're going to do it against NC State or Florida State, okay, but let's not keep lumping.
No. Again, Clemson people write in, let me know your thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm genuinely curious to know what people felt about that quote. And if I'm
totally deflated, as a Clemson fan, to me.
Yeah.
I'm not a Clemson fan, but if I were.